Hello everybody, this is Suffolk Graham here from Rand Nerds. Welcome to my review of Doctor Who Series 13, or the Flux series, Episode 5, Survivors of the Flux. Maybe some minor spoilers ahead, so if you don't think spoiled for this episode, turn off now. So, somewhat like Episode 3, this episode is all about setting up really for what's to come. It's very much obviously setting up for the finale. And not actually, stuff happens, but again, a bit like the previous episode 3, not a lot individually happens. There's lots of storylines going on in this episode. I've counted sort of, I think, 6 or 7 different storylines going on simultaneously in this episode, but they're all tying up ends or laying the foundation pieces for the finale. And things are starting to fall together and come together, and we are getting some answers as to why and what's going on, but we're getting ready for the big grand finale, what's going to answer it all. So, let's kick off from the top. The Doctor. We last saw her at the end of last week's episode being turned into a weeping angel. Turns out they did that simply to transport her. As we learnt last week, the Angels are a retrieval team for the division, and that's what they do. They retrieve the Doctor and take her back to the division, or back to a base of the divisions, where she meets the head of the division. The whole turn into an angel thing they just did for the lols. Oh, this isn't mere transport, but they actually say it did mainly because it amuses them. But they take her to the division, so the Doctor spends this episode finally where she's been trying to get information out at the division, and she finds the head of them. She finds people working for them. She finds out, as we all suspected, the division is, and I don't know if this is a spoiler because I think most people guessed him, but it's all telegraphed, I think, fairly early on. Division is behind the Flux. They are what caused it, they are what set it all up. So that's all ties up. So we now know where the Flux has come from, and it just confirms a lot of suspicions. Yaz and Dan, they found themselves stranded in 1901, as well as Professor Jericho. So they, along with him, have been basically globetrotting, because the Doctor had left a message basically saying that if something happens, you need to try and find out the date of when it all goes bad. You can do this. There'll be ripples through time which will sort of like reveal the dates. So off you go. So they try and find, stuff, clues and so forth, including raiding a few tombs with conveniently pre-lit candles in them. A bit like video games, you go into a tomb, all the candles or all the lights and stuff are already lit ready for you. How nice of everybody for you. Or they go, but that's what they find, a pre-lit candle. And they find artifact stuff, and they basically manage to track down the date to December the 5th, but not a year. What I would say is, what date is the finale set on? They also finally run into our fairly late on, and I suppose it's a spoiler, but minor spoiler. We find out what's going on with the Victorian gentleman and what he found and how he's just popping up everywhere because of what he discovered underneath in his tunnels. And they sort of like end up diverting down to us and seeing what he's doing and where the connections are, what's going on. So that's their little bit. We also now obviously saw the previews, this guy's in it. But surprisingly how involved he is in this episode. A side character from episode 3, and again, if you've watched the previews, you'll know he's in this. The Grand Serpent reappears, and I'd have put him down as a side character in episode 3 just to basically set up Vinder's backstory and so forth, and just to be discarded. But he turns back up, and he is involved in some quite pivotal backstory Doctor Who in terms of Doctor Who lore. He's involved quite heavily in some of it in the background. We find out what he's been doing, and I won't reveal too much of what he's been up to in that regards. But he has been involvement in the sort of overall Who universe. He has a certain degree of involvement in it quite heavily in certain parts of it. Talking of Vinder, we pop back across to him. We find out what he's been up to. He's been tracking his partner, girlfriend, wife, Belle, across the universe, and he finds out what Azure and Swarm have been up to and what they're doing and why they're, and or at least to find out why they're doing it, he finds out what they've been doing. And something happens to him. He's alright, but something happens to him, and he does end up running with another character who we encountered in a previous episode. They're probably the main source plotlines that appear in this episode, so there's an awful lot going on, but nothing really being resolved. It's all just setting up. It does, however, flow really nicely. There's no sort of feel of wasted space in the episode. It all runs quite nicely. It all sort of ties together. It's designed to answer things in a fairly in my opinion, a fairly satisfying way. So I'm very much looking forward to what they reveal next episode and answer it. So I think it works well. It's a neat bits of it, and I'm looking forward to where the finale leads. There are some interesting other little bits in it as well. So a sort of explanation is given. So I've said previously that between episode 1 and 2, the Doctor encounters a Flux, and then they just wake up Battlefield, as it just feels it felt a bit of a cop-out. There is somewhat of an explanation in this episode, although it feels a bit hand-wavy, how they explain what's going on in this episode, why that happened, and sort of resolves that issue. I also find that when it comes to Grand Serpent, there's only one thing I want to say to him, one of his abilities. I'm just going to say, Gertuld, for any of your Stargate fans out there. I'm just going to leave it at that because you'll know it when you see it. What sort of special effects there are in this episode are all good. There's nothing particularly ropey. Spatial effects, we see some familiar foes return. Not really, there's not a huge amount of obvious CGI. It's got its funny moments as well, when they're, particularly for Yaz, Jericho and Dan, when they're one of the characters they meet, and the interactions they have with him is, I found, quite amusing. So there's some funny, but it's got its right sort of balance of humour in this episode as well. I have to say, Chris Chibnall's, although his writing can be a bit hit or miss, he seems to have got a bit of a stride. Whether he just writes better with overall plot arcs rather than self-contained episodes, it feels like it. When he's got like a long plot arc to do, they seems to work better. When he's got small self-contained one-off episodes, they tend to be slightly worse. I've wondered if he struggles to think small scale, he has to think big scale, because there's a lot going on. I mean, some people say it's fairly complicated. I disagree. I don't think, if you've watched all 5 episodes, I wouldn't say anything's like particularly confusing about this series. I mean, some of Stephen Moffat's series got quite confusing in terms of how they jumped around, and he was probably better at throwing out lots of mysteries and then it all get resolved and answered in a very quick, satisfying, short, oh, that's how it all explains how it all comes together type situation, whereas Chris Chibnall seems to be spreading things out a little bit more and answering food bits as we go along and drip feeding, and sort of it's less so confusing what's going on and then it all gets resolved. It's more drip feeding and working quite well. So I have to say his writing's been quite good this season. I mean, he's finally come good and actually win some decent stuff. And as working, he just needs to now score the goal by completing the final episode. And I have faith, there's not been a bad episode this season. So I have faith that he will achieve that and he will get that decent last episode. So I'm looking forward to next week, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this episode ends. So overall, I like this episode. Like I said at the start, it's a very much a setup episode. It's very, I don't say it's a filler episode, because that's just be nonsense at all. It's a story arc episode, very much about setting stuff up. You could see how they could stretch this to a longer series if they want to, but they've obviously by working there 6 weeks, they've managed to self-contain, make a nice little job of it as well. So, yep, I very much enjoyed this episode. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, perhaps you'll consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. You can also watch we do podcasts every other weekend. Our next podcast is this Saturday, December the 4th. We also do have games nights as well, which you'll see the edited versions appear up every Monday. We've also got our game night streams we do alternate Tuesdays. Our next one will be the 7th of December. If you have enjoyed this, you can also check out our website, randos.co.uk. So thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you on the finale episode review, and so I look forward to seeing you next week. Also, we should also have going out some point next week as well, a sort of, me and my colleague Middlemeister will be doing like a end of series spoilerific review and look back and retrospective on what we thought went well, what we thought went bad. So keep a look out for that as well. We'll be doing that at some point after the episode airs. So thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next week.